Why are people afraid of the facts about Jews? I've met many different people, and I can say that there seems to be a general fear that arises in people when the facts about Jews come up. And when I say facts about Jews, I mean pretty much things that there is overwhelming evidence against the Jews on. Bolshevism, for instance. There's no doubt that Bolshevism was a Jewish movement. Many people at the time knew it, and that includes people who were not necessarily enemies of the Jews. Winston Churchill, for instance, wrote an entire article on the Jews and communism, entitled Zionism versus Bolshevism, a struggle for the soul of the Jewish people. In this article, Churchill said very clearly, and I quote, "This movement among the Jews is not new. From the days of Spartacus Weishaupt to those of Karl Marx and down to Trotsky in Russia, Bela Kun in Hungary, Rosa Luxemburg in Germany, and Emma Goldman in the United States, this worldwide conspiracy for the overthrow of civilization and for the reconstitution of society on the basis of arrested development, of envious malevolence and impossible equality has been steadily growing." Churchill goes on to say, "There is no need to exaggerate the part played in the creation of Bolshevism and the actual bringing about of the Russian Revolution by these international and for the most part atheistical Jews. It is certainly a very great one. It probably outweighs all others. With the notable exception of Lenin, the majority of the leading figures are Jews." Of course, nowadays we know that Lenin was at least 1/4 Jewish, but obviously that wasn't well known at the time. He goes on to say, "Moreover, the principal inspiration and driving power comes from the Jewish leaders." It really can't be much clearer than that. He's pretty much saying that Jews created Bolshevism and that Bolshevism is a Jewish conspiracy which is created for the overthrow of civilization. And that's not Adolf Hitler saying that. That's not Father Coughlin saying that. That's not Henry Ford saying that. That's Winston Churchill. And of course, many Jews confirm this themselves, albeit very quietly. The Jewish World in London, April 16, 1919, page 11, said, "The Jews have been furnishing for the Bolsheviks the majority of their leaders." Anti-Semitism and the Jewish Question, in London, 1942, page 31, said, "Karl Marx, who came from an old family of rabbis and brilliant Talmudic scholars, was to point the path of victory for the proletariat." Rabbi Stephen Wise in the American Bulletin of May 15, 1935, said, "Some call it Marxism, I call it Judaism." Rabbi Wise was also a liaison for President Roosevelt and President Wilson. Harry Wotton, in A Program for the Jews and an Answer to All Anti-Semites, published in New York for the Committee of the Preservation of the Jews in 1939, page 143, states, "The communist soul is the soul of Judaism." The Menorah Journal in New York from July to September 1932, page 106, states, "It would be absurd to deny the intensity of the Jewish participation in the Russian revolutionary movement." The American Hebrew stated on September 10, 1920, that achievement, the Russian Revolution, destined to figure in history as the overshadowing result of the World War, was largely the outcome of Jewish thinking, of Jewish discontent, and of Jewish effort to reconstruct. Now that's very similar to what Churchill said, that this was a movement to overthrow and reconstitute society on the basis of arrested development. The Jewish Voice, published in New York from the National Council of Jewish Communists, January 1942, page 16, stated, "The Jewish people will never forget that the Soviet Union was the first country, and as yet the only country in the world in which anti-Semitism is a crime." It was punishable by death, by the way. The same source said in a year before, on page 23, "Anti-communism is anti-Semitism." I could go on. There's a whole library of quotes on this, but I think you get the point. You can look them up yourself if you want to see more of them. And if quotes aren't good enough for you, then I would just tell you to look up the people who actually pushed communism. Look at their biographies. Look at their family history. Leon Trotsky, real name Lev Bronstein, the son of wealthy Jewish wine producers, also author of the book In Defense of Terrorism, which was a book that encouraged terror to be used against counter-revolutionaries. He was also founder and leader of the Red Army, as well as the leader of the First People's Commissariat, along with 4 other revolutionaries, all of whom were also Jews. Karl Marx, author of the Communist Manifesto, real name Karl Mordecai, the son of Rabbi Herschel Mordecai. And you know Mordecai was the name of the Jewish hero in the Bible, in the Old Testament in the book of Esther, who helped undermine the Persian government, similarly to what the communists did to the Russian government and to the other Eastern European governments, and tried to do to Germany also, before they were stopped by Hitler. And those are just a few of the top Jews that were involved in it, but the list really goes on and on. This prompted many people, even in our own government, to take notice of the Jewish leadership and involvement in Bolshevism. David R. Francis, the U.S. ambassador to Russia in 1918, while he was in Russia, remarked, "The Bolshevik leaders here, most of whom are Jews and 90% of whom are returned exiles, care little for Russia or any other country, but are internationalists, and they are trying to start a worldwide social revolution." Right in line with what Churchill said. So there is no doubt, really, that Bolshevism was a Jewish movement, and you can come up with any excuse you want to try and excuse it, but the fact of the matter is it was a Jewish movement. Yet these facts are very difficult for some to stomach. For instance, many Christians I have run into blatantly disregard the facts about Jews, and tend to respond with a Bible verse supposedly proving that the Jews are some sort of special group of people that cannot be criticized or opposed in any way, even if the Jews are ruining the world.
There is a promise to those who bless Israel to be blessed, those who curse will be cursed.
I mean, you can give these people all the names, dates, writings, sources, anything you can find to prove the point that Jews were behind Bolshevism, and that the reason that the Bolshevik or communist or liberal culture, whatever you want to call it, still prevails in Western civilization is due to the fact that Jews still prevail in Western civilization. Yet just about every time I have made that point to a Christian, I get a relatively hostile response, along with a Bible verse or two, about how criticizing the Jews is an evil thing, even if the criticism is true. Now that is scary. But this seems to be a mindset that has become the norm throughout American Christianity. This nonsense that Jews cannot be criticized or named in any way, even when the evidence against them is overwhelming. I'm picking on Christians at the moment, but this type of mindset really does prevail throughout all American thinking, Christian and otherwise. And it's interesting to know that no one ever asks why this mindset continues to prevail in America and who is responsible for making it that way. We just don't ask those questions here in America.